of finalizing details of the Lawing Fellows working title, but it might be the final title. And we'll be announcing our plans at next week's live stream jazz concert, which I hope you all will be able to attend. And we've been having great response to that as well. I also want to thank our very, very patient and loyal Jazz Affinity group who stood with us during this time, as well as our amazing jazz sponsors, Abundant Power and Classica Homes. Please note we will be hosting live stream jazz concert in August and September as well. And each of these will be preceded by another cocktails and conversation. We simply don't know when we'll be able to resume programming inside or outside the museum, and are actively pursuing creative ways to make these programs available to our audiences and outreach partners. Tonight is a great example of this, and I'm joined by Ziad Rabie of the Ziad Jazz Quartet, who has led Jazz at the Bechtler on the first Friday of every month since he and Christopher created this program a decade ago. Welcome, Ziad.
It's a pleasure to be here. I'm very honored to be here tonight to talk about Christopher Lawing, my close friend, and Jazz at the Bechtler.
Awesome. Tonight, Ziad and I are going to discuss the history of Jazz at the Bechtler and Christopher's tremendous impact on this program. At the end of our discussion, we'll answer any questions you may have, so feel free to type them in the chat box at the bottom of your screen. Also, if we haven't muted you already, we'd appreciate if you would mute yourself so that we can hear each other. And I just suggest you set your screen to speaker view in order to see us up close and to especially see Ziad up close. And with that, we're going to begin our conversation. So Ziad, I know you and Christopher had both a working relationship as well as a very, very close friendship. Can you tell us how you met?
Well, it's a cool story, actually. My girlfriend, when the Bechtler first opened, Jennifer Shea, she wanted to be a docent at the museum. And I was booked by an agency with a dance group that I started many years ago to perform for the New Year's Eve show or celebration at the museum 2 days before the museum opened. And so I was up there playing Prince tunes and everybody was dancing, and Mario Botha, who designed the museum, was out there, and all the dignitaries and people from the city. And so at some point after the museum opened, Jennifer was talking to Christopher, and they were discussing having a music series there. And Jennifer made the suggestion that he have a jazz series because there was a correlation between the time that was the major period of jazz music being created and modern art. And he goes, well, who would I get to do that? And so she mentioned my name, and he said, well, he remembered me from the opening night at New Year's Eve. He goes, well, that guy was playing Prince songs. Like, she assured him at that point that I could play jazz. And I'll never forget him giving me a phone call. I really kind of thought he was just kidding at first. I was not used to people calling me up and asking me if I could play Miles and Coltrane and Monk, And when we got past that, that was the beginning of how the jazz series started. I actually met him on the phone, and then at some point we got together to talk about it.
That's awesome. So tell me about the first jazz show, because I think it was outdoors on the plaza.
Right. The first jazz show was outdoors on the plaza, and I really didn't know what to expect, and I don't think anybody did. And I didn't have any expectations of grandeur or anything. I thought we were just going to play some jazz tunes for some people on the patio, and that's exactly what happened. The first show, I think there were 30 people, and that was in May of 2010. And then in June of 2010, we did another outdoor show, and I think there were 60 to 90 people that showed up, and that was cool. And then I'll never forget, going up to Christopher's office, like right before the July show, because it was blistering hot, and I had arrived to set up, and he said, well, it's really hot out there. Why don't we move it indoors? So we did, and 400 people showed up. And as we were waiting to start, our eyes kept getting bigger and bigger, because we're like, oh my God, like look, where are all these people coming from? So we were charged with trying to step up the performance, and that was, yeah.
What's he doing?
And that was how it all got started. And so honestly, Christopher was the brains behind the logistics of what we did and the model we created. He was the one after that July show, we got together the first of the week, and he said, let's have a meeting. He was the one that made the arrangements to accommodate that size crowd. He rented tables and chairs. He came up with the idea for the affinity group. That was all Christopher. And he asked me, he said, can you do themes? Can you make it different every month? Because he knew that's what would make it sustainable. And so those were the discussions we had. And that's where Christopher's genius shone through. I remember he came to me after the first concert, and he said, wow, man, I don't think he was expecting the performance to be that level. And he was very complimentary. But once we got together after July, it was my turn to be impressed, because he just had the formula. He knew what to do. And so I was very lucky. And so was the Jazz series, because of that affiliation with Christopher Lawing.
And suddenly we're up to 2 shows a night.
Right. That was about 3 years later, I think. So,
And it's been that way ever since.
And we were I was hesitant to do it, actually. I was thinking to myself, I don't like, if it's not broken, let's not fix it. And Christopher assured me that we were turning so many people away that it wouldn't be a problem, and it would, at the very least, require a small marketing push. But the first time we did 2 shows, they both sold out, and it's been that way ever since. And we were able to double the affinity group because of it.
And we have a waiting list for the affinity group. So I mean, it is true testament.
Yeah.
Ziad, talk a little bit about the the Bechtler, of course, is a museum first.
Right.
So talk a little bit about the connection to the art, and you talked about themes, and so how do the themes relate to jazz?
Right. Well, not all the themes relate to a specific art, but there are correlations. I mean, improvisation and experimentation are common threads between jazz and modern art. And, so those are the parallels. They share the same era during the 40s and 50s, where a lot of modern art was being created, and jazz was the same. So many different styles of jazz were emerging, and experimentation was the order of the day in the music as well. And, jazz is an art form, and a lot of the musicians drew a lot of inspiration from jazz, and the artists drew inspiration from jazz, and the musicians drew inspiration from the artists. We know that Jackson Pollock listened to jazz incessantly when he was creating art, and his wife said, he would be playing bebop music 24 hours at a time while he would create. And I think his art form led a lot of people to think that anybody can do this, because he was throwing paint on the canvas. But he actually took a lot of time to plan and think about what he was going to do in advance. And I think that there's a shared parallel between jazz in that respect, because even though we are performing with reckless abandon on stage, and all that spontaneity is is happening. Behind that is like a lifetime of practicing, you know. So we spend hours and hours and hours when nobody's around, you know, practicing. And there's other correlations. I mean, if you look at the Jazz at Home pages that I've been putting up, we started calling them flashback pages because they're like flashbacks into past performances. And on this most recent one, I put up some album covers. There was a particular guy at CBS Records and Columbia Records named Esnil Fujita, and he was an abstract artist, and he was in charge of the art department for CBS and Columbia. And so the famous album cover to Dave Brubeck's famous album Time Out was actually an original painting by Esnil Fujita, as well as a Charles Mingus album called Aum. So he also commissioned artists of the time to do album covers, and he was including Andy Warhol. Actually, Andy Warhol is one of the people that he commissioned. Other inspirations for the musicians, like for instance, we're doing in September tribute to Coltrane, and we're going to do the Blue Train album, and that album cover was inspired by the artist Picasso, and inspired by his Blue period. And then Picasso had the painting Three Musicians. Miles Davis was a painter, prolific painter. He got started in the 50s, right during the modern art era, and he was influenced by Kandinsky and Basquiat and Picasso and so many others. And many of the jazz artists had their portraits painted by significant artists of the time. There was a lot of correlation and overlap. And one specific story about Christopher in this regard, Christopher and I discussed many times what was going on in the museum and how, you know, we tried to find ways that we could correlate the theme of a particular concert with what was going to be happening in the museum. And one year there was a exhibition called Giacometti Memory and Presence, and it was based on existentialism. And Christopher comes to me and he says, is there a correlation between existentialist art and jazz? And actually there was, and I guess Giacometti was very influenced by Jean-Paul Sartre, and you know, Sartre argued, you know, that mankind is by nature autonomous. And so the free jazz movement that was spearheaded by Ornette Coleman, Coltrane, Eric Dolphy, exemplified this freedom because they completely eliminated chord structure during the solos, and it was all free. So I was hesitant to try it because in my mind it was going to be the most avant-garde show we'd ever done, you know, and I was not sure the audience would be receptive to it. But this tells you a lot about Christopher Long. He was like, you know, he was the adventurous spirit. He was like, let's do it, you know, let's hit them, see what happens, you know. And so, so to my surprise, it was very enthusiastically received. And so there was a big sigh of relief after the first few songs, because we were definitely taking it out there. And it showed me, you know, Christopher's adventurous spirit and how hip the audience at the Bechtler was. And it liberated me in terms of, you know, future planning for concerts, because I was like, man, these people can handle it, you know?
That's awesome. Yeah, you mentioned Dave Brubeck, and I know you and I discussed a few of the concerts, particularly the October 2019 show with Dave Brubeck's son, Chris, and the connection with our founding president and CEO, John Boyer. You want to tell that little story?
Yeah, well, Chris, well, it's kind of a, I could go back to to the time that we actually did our first Dave Brubeck concert in the early years, and then in the 5th anniversary in the May concert, which was the actual month we started the jazz series, we did a 5-year kind of thing. And we had Peter Rubino come in, who was a renowned sculptor who, it turns out by chance, had known the whole Brubeck family. And he did a speed sculpture of a bust of Dave Brubeck in like 15 minutes with us performing behind him as accompaniment. And so all of that eventually led to Chris reaching out to Chris through Peter, and Peter showed him a video of that, which I just posted on the Flashback 3 Jazz at Home, which is the first video up there of him sculpting Dave Brubeck right in front of everyone. And that's how we met Chris, and he agreed to come and perform with us. And so John was, talking to him and recounting how he used to live in, he and Tricia used to live in Wilton, Connecticut as well, and go on walks and pass by the Brubeck home, which was quite a work of art in itself, and how he and his wife would comment about this home. And they discussed the possibility of Chris coming down at some point and possibly participating in a modernism and film presentation about the Brubeck home. Yeah, it was designed originally by a guy named Beverly David Thorne, and he had designed a Brubeck home in Oakland originally. And so because he designed Brubeck's home, he got famous, but he didn't want to deal with high-profile clients, so he just moved to Hawaii and disappeared. But ultimately, he came back to when the Brubecks moved to the East Coast and designed their home in Wilton, Connecticut. So that was a correlation in a small world moment, you know.
That's pretty cool. You mentioned the 5th anniversary, and let's talk a little bit about the 5th anniversary of both the Bechtler as well as Jazz at the Bechtler, because as we discussed, this really became a pivotal time for the program.
Mm-hmm.
Can you maybe talk a little bit about why and what changed around then?
So you mean exactly like how we got progressed towards what happened at the 5th year anniversary, or you mean afterwards?
Well, around the 5th anniversary, didn't the program change a little bit, and
yeah,
that's what I meant to talk about.
I see. Yeah, the so at the 5-year anniversary, I was looking ahead. I'm like, what are the next 5 years going to look like for Jazz at the Bechtler? And previously, and the 5-year anniversary reflected, all the artists that were more regional and friends that we had brought in, and great musicians from around the area, excuse me, who played with us, and they came and did the 5-year anniversary show with us. But after that, I thought, well, we have to move forward at some point and try to do something, because the landscape had changed and we weren't the only game in town. There was another jazz series. There was 2 jazz festivals, and many of you know recently a jazz club opened last year, Middle C Jazz Club. And so things were changing in Charlotte, and I felt like that we needed to progress as well, since we pioneered this type of series in Charlotte. So I happened to run into Mel Watt, who was a former director of federal housing and U.S. congressman from this area. And he was at a private show or celebration party at the lobby of the museum for Bernie Hargadon, who's also a good friend of mine now, that I met through the jazz series. And Mel says, hey, I know this amazing harmonica player in Washington, D.C., and he played with Prince for 4 years, and he toured with Stevie Wonder and played harmonica. And I'm like thinking, wow, Stevie Wonder, man, like harmonica with Stevie Wonder, who's quite the amazing harmonica player. And I said, well, I'm not sure the budget that we currently have that we could afford to bring him here. And he goes, I think I can get him to come. So he agreed to come for half of what he normally gets because of Mel. And I'm thinking to myself, I got this proposal in my mind about what I want to present to the museum about how to move the jazz series forward. And sometimes, you know, an experience or a picture or what, you know, is worth 1,000 words. And I thought, this is perfect timing. We'll get him to come in and everyone can sort of see what I'm talking about. And that's exactly what happened. And he came in and did an incredible performance. And so, you know, my goal was to try to start bringing in more nationally known artists to perform with us, and, you know, try to upgrade the series and make the experience exciting and more powerful. And the beauty is, you know, that Christopher always supported me in that. He understood it. He always got me, and he completely was behind it. He saw it as a natural progression, and so did John. And that's kind of where the next 5 years went. You know, that's how it went the next 5 years.
Okay, well, so speaking of John Boyer, we can't go on without bringing up his infamous speeches in the middle of each concert.
Yeah.
I mean,
yes, of course. Well, you know, John was and is such an eloquent speaker, and definitely the envy of many regarding his ability to speak off the cuff. And he would come up during our performances to, you know, exemplify the mission statement of the museum and connect what we were doing to the art, and maybe make some announcements about what was going to come. And it was a great opportunity for that. And he sort of developed his own fan base, you know, within the jazz audience, because you know, he would include poetry, and he was always passing around and recognizing the musicians and passing around great compliments to all of us. And he verbalized the unity of, you know, the mind and spirit that the series really was providing for all of us, you know, because it was a very unifying experience. And most importantly, he gave us one heck of a nice little breather there in a 90-minute show that's pretty taxing when you have to do 2 of them in one night, right?
but you had a little trick when he went on a little longer. You did have a little backup trick as to how to handle it, right?
I did. I always had a song right after that I knew I could cut without like making the show, you know, impacted negatively. So I always had that cuttable song there, just in case.
I love that. John always told me the first Friday every month was his favorite day of the month. So
he told me that as well, you know, and he consistently said that throughout the whole time that he was there. So at first I thought he was just trying to, you know, be nice, but then I started believing him, you know, after so many years went by and he kept saying it.
Big question. What are your just in a short answer, because this could be you know, you could go on for this because I'm sure you have a lot of great memories, but what are your best memories of the past 10 years?
God, there's so many, man.
I know.
I've learned so much. It's been an opportunity for me to delve into so many individual artists in a very specific and detailed way. But I would say some of the biggest moments would be that first July show when all those people showed up and we were just flabbergasted. That was incredible. I think going to 2 shows was quite a memorable experience, and all my apprehension, and then realizing that, you know, that many more people wanted to come to see us. I think the 5th anniversary show was special because of Christopher singing. He actually sang Have You Met Miss Jones at that show. We had a big horn section on that show. And so we had a horn arrangement that we did with him. And I had heard him sing once before here at our house for a little party when one of the people that worked at the museum was going to be leaving. And he and another staff member who had a classical background, they sang a duet with piano accompaniment. And my jaw just dropped to the floor. I just could not believe Christopher's voice. Honestly, it was, you know, it was just mind-boggling. And so it was a big eye-opener for me. And I was excited that he wanted to sing at the 5th anniversary. We had a lot of fun with that. And some of the other memories, I think, was Frédéric Yonnet coming, some of the great artists that I've admired over the years, and now I've been able to perform with and get to know, like Nina Friedland and Russell Malone, who I met in Atlanta back in the 80s. He came to perform with us, Nicholas Beard, Curtis Taylor, and Chris Brubeck. I was sad that COVID hit for so many reasons, of course, but from the standpoint of the jazz series, we had Eddie Henderson that was supposed to be here in April, who played with Herbie Hancock on some monumental records and played with Miles. So I was looking forward to that, but hopefully that will be rescheduled and come back down the pipeline later.
We'll be live again at some point. We'll be live
We
again.
sure will.
You and I discussed how Christopher understood performance and always admired the way he took care of the artists. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, he understood he understood what was happening in a musical situation, because effectively he was a musician and he understood music. And so for me, he knew the value of communicating the educational aspects of what we were doing. We talked a lot about those types of things. It's a fine line that you walk when you talk too much at a concert about information. So, I always heard that. I have some friends that play with Prince, and when he would record, he would put so many tracks down that you would never use all of them. And then his process of coming up with the final product was eliminating them till he got what fit together perfectly. And so I think I sort of adopted that method of getting rid of my comments till I kind of honed down what was important and maybe what was anecdotal, because at some point it's more about the music and more about interesting things that people can relate to, that humanize these artists that are so iconic. I think that's important. And as far as the nationally known artists that we brought to the museum, there was a lot on me to make sure the music was right and organized and to plan for that. And so a lot of these more nationally known artists have writers, and so Christopher always had my back. Like, I think he just, let the air out of the balloon of stress that I had, because I just could tell he had it down. And Daniel Ferrulli, who was working with him side by side, I just knew Christopher had it down. He would take care of it, and that's exactly what always happened. So he was a great partner to have, partner in crime for all the things we've done over the last 10 years.
Yeah, I remember Christopher, when you had a soloist or a singer, a renowned singer, he would take pleasure in going upstairs and escorting them down through the elevator and getting them to the stage. So
yeah, he did that quite a bit, and he was good at it.
He was great at it, and he loved it.
Yeah, he knew the show. He knew the show thing, and he knew how to make it happen. Yeah,
He did. The Bechtler is lucky for that. I mean,
yeah, we were very lucky, all of us.
Yep. Okay, so you told me a story involving the vice president of our board, Bob Lillian.
Yes.
And when you met him for the first time, and can you share that a little? I know it's funny, but just share that a little bit.
That's really a great story, actually. I think we had maybe 3 years into it. I think we'd gone to 2 shows by this time, and I'd never met Bob Lillian, and I knew who he was, but I never met him, and I knew he was integral. One of the most integral people in developing the museum, outside of the donation of the art by Andreas Bechtler. So I was in the lobby one day, and John was talking to him, and John said, "Come here, I want you to meet someone." So I walked over there, and he introduced me to Bob. And he said, John said, "You have to come to see this guy's jazz show. They've been selling out concerts, and it's really a cool thing, and I think you would enjoy it." And Bob looked at me, you know, many of you might know him with this big smile that he has. And luckily he was smiling. And he said, well, it's jazz. How good could it be? So
I can totally
I
hear
found
him say that.
myself like, right. I thought, well, he's smiling, so I'm gonna be cool. And I said, well, I'll tell you what. I said, just give me one shot. Just come to see us one time. If you don't like it, no harm, no foul. But give me one shot. And lo and behold, he gave me one shot, and he came out. And that's why today I call him my greatest conquest, because after the show was over, I got up the next day, and I had received really one of the most touching emails I think I've ever received from him. And he talked about how he knew Mario Botha, and how Mario Botha had said about the design of the museum that there was a heart of light. And he said, you know, I'm usually pretty on top of things and I understand what people mean. He said, but I didn't understand what he meant till I saw your group and the electricity and the talent on the stage, and primarily the fact that people were in a special place experiencing something special together. And that's when he determined that that's really what he meant by the heart of light, was what happens inside the museum. And I think that I'd like to add, you know, that as a footnote to that story, and is that he's been coming consistently now whenever he can and become a loyal fan. But I think that, you know, Christopher and his programming ideas from the outset were literally little innovative and genius, considering what most art museums are like in terms of programming. And I think he really made a huge impact with his out-of-the-box thinking in that respect. And so the Heart of Light comes from that as well, from all the programs that Christopher created. And we know how many there are, Music and Museum with Tanya Bechtler, and all the other programs, Modernism and Film, and the Jail Arts Initiative, on and on and on. It was really a genius. He was a genius person to have at the right time, this museum, when it first opened.
He understood the power of programming and the responsibility of a cultural institution to give back to the community. And I think the Bechtler's programming, I mean, no other museum in this community has any programming like us. And that's why we're more than a museum, is what we always say. So
yeah, of course.
And, you know, through the past 10 years, you've become, you know, a part of our family and one of the faces of Bechtler.
It's interesting they use that term, because after, you know, these 10 years of performing jazz at the Bechtler, I have to say that when I look out at the audience and see the faces that I remember, it really has become a family affair. And it warms my heart not only to see the people supporting us, but also the new faces that they bring with them to experience it with them. And you know, it's a blessing that we can all come together, no matter what we think about anything else, and share this, you know, human camaraderie and witness music. And there's nothing more beautiful than that. That's the reason I got into music in the first place. And so I feel really blessed and fortunate to be able to do this and to have this beautiful audience to play for twice a night on First Fridays.
I mean, to see the line outside the Bechtler, you know, starting at around, you know, 5 o'clock for a 6 o'clock show, and then, you know, at 7 o'clock for the 8 o'clock show. I mean, there's a line outside the building. It's just amazing.
It is. And, you know, it's also, you know, an intense thing, because, you know, when people come to see you regularly, you always got to try to find a new way to up the game and make them want to keep coming back. So it's a challenge, and but it's also a relief, because I think when you play in front of people that you're friendly with and that you know are friendly towards you, it liberates all of the anxiety from everyone, and we just we just get in there and have a blast performing and trying to get the audience in there with us to experience what we're experiencing.
Yeah, the room feels amazing. The nights of jazz, and again, we look so forward to when we can do that again. We're probably a ways away, but we're trying to find new ways. And as I mentioned, we've committed right now to have 3 live streamed concerts. We'll talk a little bit about that in a minute, and
Yeah.
they're gonna be done from a special kind of a rehearsal hall called the Playroom. And what we're going to be doing is also do one of these cocktails and conversations before each, like a week or so before each of the shows. And for me, this one's dedicated to the memory of our great friend Christopher. But over the next couple of months, I think one of the great benefits is going to be that the public is going to be able to get to know you a little bit more on a personal level, Ziad. So I think we're all looking forward to that.
Well, I'm looking forward to it as well, very much.
Awesome. Okay, so without giving all the secrets away, we have a really well attended, a good response so far to next Friday's live stream concert, our first one. Can you give us a little bit of information without giving it all away about what to expect?
Yeah. Well, we're trying to come into people's homes, and it's unusual circumstances these days, but I think it's important that we show our face, and the music doesn't have to go away, and we can live stream, and certainly it's not the same as having the electricity of an audience being there, but I feel like by doing this, we're getting through it together, and I feel that is really cool. As far as the show itself, most of the titles of the songs are going to be relative to, expressing our feelings towards Christopher or connected to him in some way. And, I remember one of Christopher's birthdays, we actually went in the studio and recorded a song for him that he requested by John Coltrane. So we're going to play that. And I wrote, and when he first called me that first time and said, "Do you play Miles, Train, and Monk?" So I wanted to sort of honor that a little bit. And I wrote a song for Christopher, and that's the name of it. And it's a jazz ballad, and we're gonna perform that song as well.
Well, we're looking forward to that. You mentioned, by the way, the Bechtler's Museum from homepage, and I urge everybody to check that out because, as Ziad said, there's a special section for each of our programs, but there's some really special elements that you provided to that page. So please check it out, everyone. I don't know if anyone has any questions. We asked that, I don't know if everyone was on earlier, but we asked people to type them in to the chat if they had any questions, and Daniel would let us know. But if there are no questions, what I'd like to do now, it's cocktails and conversations. So I have my cocktail. So I'd like to propose a toast to Christopher Lawing.
You're here.
This is actually water. I was afraid if it was vodka that I would not make it through this whole thing, so I will replace it with the normal thing that goes in that glass.
Mine's water too. I quit drinking years ago, back in the 90s. I got tired of alcohol, so probably as I was getting older, my body said, "Just stop and you'll feel better."
Well, I'll make that correctly, and I'll feel better in a few minutes as well. I want to thank everybody for being on here. I particularly want to thank Nell Lawing, Christopher's beloved mother, who has been an incredible supporter of the museum, continues to be a supporter of the museum, and has just, I know how close they were. I know when Christopher passed away, he passed away in her home. We've had some beautiful conversations over the last week or so. And I don't know if Matt was able to make it on. He's in Texas, and he said that the connections weren't very well. But if he's on here, there's too many people. I can't find him. But to both of them, please know that you're in our hearts, you're in our thoughts, and our deepest sympathies to both of you. But we have all had the fortune of being touched by our great friend Christopher Laing. So thank you all for being here. Thank you, Nell, for being here, and please tune in next Friday. And everybody have a great evening.